What started as routine promotion turned into television chaos when Mark Wahlberg confronted Jimmy Kimmel over a joke about his past, leading to an explosive argument that ended with security escorting the A-list actor off set. The studio audience settled into their seats expecting another typical late-night entertainment show. Mark Wahlberg had appeared on Jimmy Kimmel Live countless times before, usually promoting his latest action film or discussing his Boston roots with easygoing banter. Tonight felt different from the moment Wahlberg walked onto the stage. Kimmel opened with his usual monologue, but something in his demeanor seemed more aggressive than usual. When he introduced Wahlberg, there was an edge to his voice that seasoned viewers might have caught. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mark Wahlberg, who's here to tell us about his new movie and hopefully not beat anyone up backstage." The audience laughed, but Wahlberg's smile faltered slightly as he took his seat. He'd dealt with jokes about his troubled youth for decades, but something about Kimmel's delivery rubbed him wrong. Still, he maintained his composure, settling into the guest chair with practiced ease. "So, Mark, you've got another action movie coming out," Kimmel began, leaning back in his chair with that familiar smirk. "At 53, when do you think you'll finally retire from pretending to be tough on screen?" Wahlberg's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Well, Jimmy, I think as long as audiences want to see authentic stories about real people overcoming real challenges, there's always going to be a place for that kind of filmmaking." "Authentic stories," Kimmel repeated, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Right, because nothing says authentic like a millionaire actor from Dorchester pretending he's still connected to the streets." The studio fell uncomfortably quiet. Even the band members exchanged glances. This wasn't the usual playful ribbing that characterized most celebrity interviews. There was genuine malice in Kimmel's voice. Wahlberg leaned forward slightly, his voice remaining controlled but firm. "Jimmy, I've never pretended to be something I'm not. I've been very open about my past, the mistakes I made, and how I've worked to make amends." "Oh yes, the redemption arc," Kimmel continued, seemingly oblivious to the tension he was creating. "Tell me, Mark, do you think your victims from back in the day watch your movies and think, 'Oh good, the guy who gave me permanent vision problems is now worth $300 million?' The reference to Wahlberg's 1988 assault conviction hit like a sledgehammer. Wahlberg's publicist, sitting in the green room, immediately reached for her phone. This was crossing every line of professional conduct in the entertainment industry. "Jimmy, that's completely inappropriate," Wahlberg said, his Boston accent becoming more pronounced as his anger rose. "I was 16 years old. I served my time, I made direct amends to the people involved, and I've spent 35 years trying to be a better person." "Have you, though?" Kimmel pressed, clearly enjoying the discomfort he was causing. "Because from where I sit, it looks like you just got rich and famous enough that people stopped caring about what you did." The audience was dead silent now. Camera operators were getting signals from producers in the booth, unsure whether to keep rolling or cut to commercial. Wahlberg's hands were visibly shaking, not from fear, but from the effort it was taking to maintain his composure. "You know what, Jimmy?" Wahlberg stood up slowly, his voice dangerously quiet. "I came here tonight to talk about a movie that employs hundreds of people, supports dozens of families, and tells a story about second chances. But instead, you want to drag up the worst moment of my life for cheap laughs." Kimmel seemed to realize he'd gone too far, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. "Hey, I'm just asking the questions people want answered. Isn't that what journalism is about?" "Journalism?" Wahlberg's voice rose for the first time. "This isn't journalism, Jimmy. This is a hit job. And frankly, coming from someone who built their career on making fun of people who can't fight back, it's pretty rich." The tension in the studio was now so thick it was almost visible. Audience members were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether they were witnessing entertainment or a genuine breakdown in professional courtesy. Security personnel had quietly moved closer to the stage area. Kimmel's face flushed red. He'd always prided himself on being able to handle difficult guests, but Wahlberg's controlled fury was unlike anything he'd encountered. The actor wasn't yelling or causing a scene in the traditional sense, but his quiet intensity was somehow more intimidating than any outburst would have been. "Mark, maybe we should take a break," Kimmel suggested, finally recognizing that the situation was spiraling out of control. "No, Jimmy, let's not take a break," Wahlberg replied, his voice steady but filled with barely contained rage. "Let's finish this conversation." The studio lights seemed to burn brighter as the two men stared at each other across the desk. Kimmel's usual confident demeanor was beginning to crack, but his pride kept him from backing down. He glanced nervously at his cue cards, then back at Wahlberg, who remained standing, towering over the seated host. "Look, Mark, I think you're being a little sensitive here," Kimmel said, attempting to regain control of the situation. "This is comedy. It's what we do. If you can't handle a few jokes about your past, maybe you shouldn't be in Hollywood." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Several audience members audibly gasped. Even Kimmel's band leader was shaking his head, recognizing that his boss had just made a catastrophic error in judgment. Wahlberg's face went stone cold. "Sensitive? Jimmy, let me tell you something about sensitivity. I was a 16-year-old kid from a broken home, addicted to cocaine, angry at the world. I hurt people, and that's something I have to live with every single day. But you know what I don't have to live with? Some privileged comedian from Brooklyn lecturing me about my past while he sits behind a desk worth more than most people's houses." The personal attack on Kimmel's background hit its mark. The host's face reddened further and his voice took on a defensive edge. "Privileged? I worked my way up from nothing, just like you claim you did." "Claim?" Wahlberg stepped closer to the desk, his voice rising. "I didn't claim anything, Jimmy. I lived it. While you were making prank calls for radio stations, I was trying not to get shot walking to school. While you were kissing up to celebrities for interviews, I was working construction at 4 in the morning to pay for acting classes." The audience was completely silent now, transfixed by the raw emotion pouring out of both men. This wasn't scripted banter or manufactured drama for ratings. This was two successful men having a very real, very ugly confrontation on live television. Kimmel tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out forced and hollow. "Come on, Mark. You're taking this way too seriously. We're both entertainers here. We both know how this game works." "Game?" Wahlberg's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "This isn't a game to me, Jimmy. My past isn't entertainment for your audience. The people I hurt weren't punchlines for your monologue. And the work I've done to try to make things right isn't material for your jokes." The host was sweating now, visible beads of perspiration forming on his forehead under the hot studio lights. His writers in the booth were frantically gesturing, but he couldn't see them. He was trapped in this moment with an increasingly angry movie star, and no clear way out. "You want to know what's really funny, Jimmy?" Wahlberg continued, his voice gaining momentum. "You sit here every night making jokes about other people's lives, other people's struggles, other people's mistakes. But when was the last time you put yourself on the line? When was the last time you risked anything real?" Kimmel's defensive mechanisms kicked in, and he made another crucial mistake. "At least I never blinded anyone in a racially motivated attack." The words cut through the studio like a knife. The reference to the specific details of Wahlberg's teenage assault was not just inappropriate, it was cruel. Even the camera operators stopped what they were doing, unsure whether they should continue filming. Wahlberg's entire body went rigid. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, and for a moment everyone in the studio held their breath, wondering if they were about to witness something truly explosive. "Get up," Wahlberg said quietly. "What?" Kimmel's voice cracked slightly. "I said get up. Stand up and say that to my face like a man instead of hiding behind your desk like a coward." Kimmel remained seated, his bravado finally beginning to crumble. "Mark, I think we should really take that break now. Stand up! Wahlberg's voice boomed through the studio, causing several audience members to jump in their seats. You want to talk about my past? You want to make jokes about the worst thing I ever did? Then have the courage to do it while looking me in the eye, not from behind your little desk where you feel safe. The host's hands were visibly shaking now as he gripped the edge of his desk. His security team was getting ready to intervene, but they were unsure how to handle a situation where the guest was demanding the host stand up, rather than trying to physically attack him. You know what your problem is, Jimmy? Wahlberg continued, his voice carrying across the silent studio. You've spent so many years hiding behind jokes and sarcasm that you've forgotten how to be a real person. You think being funny gives you license to be cruel. You think entertainment excuses cruelty. Kimmel finally found his voice, though it came out smaller than usual. I'm just doing my job, Mark. Your job? Wahlberg laughed, but there was no humor in it. Your job is to entertain people, not to tear them down for sport. Your job is to make people feel good about spending an hour with you before they go to bed, not to make them uncomfortable witnesses to your personal vendettas. The studio audience began to murmur among themselves, some clearly uncomfortable with the direction the confrontation had taken. A few people in the front rows were checking their phones, already posting about what they were witnessing. The producers, in the control room, were having heated discussions about whether to cut to commercial or let the train wreck continue. Kimmel finally stood up, but his movement was shaky and uncertain. Face to face with Wahlberg, the physical difference between them was stark. The host looked smaller, diminished, while the actor's presence seemed to fill the entire stage area. You think you're better than me? Kimmel shot back, his voice taking, on a desperate edge. You think because you've made some movies and donated some money that erases what you did, that makes you some kind of saint? Wahlberg shook his head slowly, his expression one of disgust rather than anger now. I never said I was better than anyone, Jimmy, but I know the difference between accountability and exploitation. I know the difference between owning your mistakes and profiting from other people's pain. Oh, spare me the philosophy lesson, Kimmel snapped, his composure completely gone now. You're an actor who got lucky. You read lines other people write and pretend to be other people for a living. Don't lecture me about authenticity. The insult to Wahlberg's profession was the final straw for many in the audience. Several people stood up to leave, clearly disgusted by their host's behavior. The energy in the room had shifted completely. What had started as entertainment had become something ugly and personal. You know what, Jimmy? You're right about one thing, Wahlberg said, his voice becoming dangerously calm again. I do read lines other people write, but at least when I'm playing a character, I'm honest about it. You've been playing a character for so long that you've forgotten who you really are underneath all the makeup and scripted jokes. Kimmel's face was now bright red, veins visible on his forehead. Get out of here, Mark. Just get out. Oh, now you want me to leave? Wahlberg's voice rose again. After you ambushed me with personal attacks? After you tried to humiliate me on national television? Now you want to dismiss me like I'm some nobody who wandered onto your stage? The security team was now positioned at the edges of the stage, ready to intervene if the situation escalated further. But Wahlberg wasn't making any threatening moves. His anger was purely verbal, which somehow made it more devastating. You invited me here tonight, Jimmy, Wahlberg continued, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned studio. You asked me to come on your show to promote my work, to give your audience something interesting to watch. But instead of doing your job as a host, you decided to try to destroy me for your own entertainment. Kimmel was breathing heavily now, clearly overwhelmed by the situation he had created. I was just asking tough questions. That's what good interviewers do. Tough questions? Wahlberg's laugh was harsh and bitter. Tough questions are about my work, my process, my choices as an actor and producer. Tough questions aren't personal attacks designed to humiliate your guest. You didn't ask me anything. You just threw accusations and insults." The studio was so quiet that every word echoed clearly. Even the band had stopped playing background music, leaving nothing but the sound of two men having the kind of argument that usually happens in private. "And you know what the really sad part is, Jimmy?" Wahlberg's voice dropped to almost a whisper, but it carried throughout the silent studio. "You're actually talented. You're funny when you want to be. You can be charming and entertaining. But somewhere along the way, you decided that being cruel was easier than being creative." The personal nature of the critique seemed to hit Kimmel harder than any of the previous insults. His eyes welled up slightly, though whether from anger or something else was unclear. "Don't you dare try to psychoanalyze me," Kimmel said, his voice breaking slightly. "You don't know anything about me or what I've been through." "You're right, I don't," Wahlberg replied. "Because you hide behind your jokes and your sarcasm and your fake smile. You never let anyone see who you really are. At least I've been honest about my failures. At least I've admitted when I was wrong and tried to make it right." The confrontation had reached a level of personal intensity that made everyone in the studio uncomfortable. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was two successful men stripping away each other's public personas and revealing something raw and painful underneath. Kimmel suddenly slammed his hand down on his desk, the sound echoing through the studio, like a gunshot. "Enough! This is my show. These are my cameras, my studio, my audience. You don't get to come here and lecture me about how to do my job." Wahlberg stepped back slightly, not from fear but from surprise at the host's outburst. "There it is," he said quietly. "The real Jimmy Kimmel. Not the funny guy, not the charming host. Just an insecure bully who can't handle being called out for his behavior." The words hung in the air like a final judgment. Kimmel's face went from red to pale in seconds, as if the blood had drained from his entire body. He looked around the studio desperately, searching for support from his band, his writers, anyone who might validate his position. But all he found were uncomfortable stares and disappointed faces. "You want to know what's really pathetic, Jimmy?" Wahlberg continued, his voice now carrying the weight of absolute moral authority. "I came here tonight prepared to be vulnerable. I was ready to talk about my mistakes, my growth, the people I've hurt, and how I've tried to make amends. Because that's what real people do. They own their failures and try to learn from them." Kimmel opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He was completely deflated, his usual quick wit abandoned him entirely. The studio audience was watching in stunned silence, many of them clearly sympathizing with Wahlberg's position. "But you," Wahlberg pointed directly at the host, "you saw that vulnerability as weakness. You saw my honesty as an opportunity to score cheap points. You took the worst moment of my life and tried to turn it into a punchline for your monologue." The security team was still positioned nearby, but it was clear they wouldn't be needed. This wasn't going to escalate into physical violence. This was something worse for Kimmel, a complete and public dismantling of his professional reputation. "And you know what the really sick part is?" Wahlberg's voice rose again, but now it carried disappointment rather than anger. "Your audience deserves better than this. These people came here tonight to be entertained, to laugh, to forget about their problems for an hour. Instead, you gave them a masterclass in how to be a cruel, unprofessional bully." Several audience members began to applaud, slowly at first, then building to a sustained ovation. They weren't applauding the confrontation. They were applauding Wahlberg's dignity in the face of Kimmel's unprofessional behavior. Kimmel finally found his voice, but it came out as a weak whisper. "Mark, I think maybe we got carried away here." "No, Jimmy," Wahlberg shook his head firmly. "You got carried away. I tried to be professional. I tried to redirect the conversation. I gave you multiple opportunities to be a decent human being, but you chose to double down on cruelty every single time." The host looked desperately toward his producers in the control room, but they were clearly as disgusted with his behavior as everyone else. One of them was already on the phone, likely with network executives who were watching this disaster unfold in real time. "I think we're done here," Wahlberg said, beginning to remove the small microphone clipped to his shirt. "This isn't the kind of show I want to be associated with, and you're not the kind of person I want to work with." Kimmel made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Mark, wait! Can't we just—" "No," Wahlberg cut him off sharply. "We can't just anything. You made your choice tonight, Jimmy. You chose to be petty and cruel instead of professional and respectful. You chose to attack a guest instead of entertaining your audience. And now you get to live with the consequences of that choice." The actor handed his microphone to a nearby sound technician and began walking toward the exit. The audience erupted, in applause again, this time standing and cheering for Wahlberg's dignified exit. As he reached the edge of the stage, Wahlberg turned back one final time. "You know, Jimmy, I really hope you learned something from this. Because if you don't, you're going to find yourself very alone in this business very quickly. People in Hollywood might tolerate a lot of things, but they don't tolerate bullies who attack their guests." With that, Mark Wahlberg walked off the Jimmy Kimmel Live stage, leaving behind a host who looked completely broken, and an audience that was still applauding his departure. The studio fell into an uncomfortable silence as Kimmel stood alone behind his desk, staring at the exit through which his guest had just walked. The show's producers quickly cut to commercial, but the damage was done. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation were spreading across social media platforms. Mark Wahlberg Right began trending immediately, with thousands of viewers expressing their support for the actor's handling of the situation. Behind the scenes, network executives were already in emergency meetings. Kimmel's behavior had crossed every line of professional conduct, and the public reaction was swift and brutal. Advertisers began pulling their spots from future shows, and guest representatives started canceling upcoming appearances. As Wahlberg left the studio building, he was met by his publicist and security team. "How do you feel?" his publicist asked. "Disappointed," Wahlberg replied honestly. "I really thought we were better than that as an industry. I thought we'd learned something about treating people with respect, regardless of their past." The confrontation had exposed something ugly in the entertainment industry: the tendency to treat people's pain and mistakes as content for consumption. But it had also shown that sometimes, when someone stands up for dignity and respect, people will support them. By morning, the incident had become a watershed moment in late-night television, sparking conversations about professional conduct, the treatment of guests, and the responsibility that comes with having a platform. Jimmy Kimmel's reputation never fully recovered from that night, while Mark Wahlberg's stock in Hollywood rose even higher for his principled stand against bullying and exploitation.